We'll start again.
You see?
Excellent. Well, great. It's great to see everybody here this week. I have a special guest. This is Michelle Lamphere. Michelle is the president of WEMA USA, which is kind of growing close to my own heart. She's got a lot going on, so I'll get her to talk about the organization, talk about herself, talk about her crazy travels, which I have now been following for, I can't think if it's a year or 2 years now. And I will just turn this over to Michelle.
Oh, hey. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Deb, and thank you very much for the invitation. And thanks to all of you guys for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. As Deb said, my name is Michelle Lamphere. I was born and raised in Sturgis, South Dakota, and believe it or not, did not grow up around motorcycles. I grew up on a ranch east of the city and really didn't have any family or friends who rode bikes. So this was something that was new to me. But anyway, eventually I found my way to them, and I'm so glad that I did. So tonight I'm going to take a little bit of time to share some travels that I've had, some of my relationships with motorcycles themselves, and along the way, what that journey has looked like for me. So where I fall into the motorcycle spectrum, so to speak, as I like to call it. So I'm going to share screen, if I may, and start a slideshow. Give me just a quick second and I'll be ready to go. Can you guys see that?
Not yet.
All right, let's see.
Yeah.
There you go.
There we go. Good. I'm a little rusty, so thanks for bearing with me here. All right. So hopefully you can kind of follow along. So I have a few travels. I know Deb just said they were crazy travels, and that's so true. I think it's not maybe the normal way to experience motorcycling for some people. But yeah, something fun and something different. So hopefully we have a little fun as I share some of my experiences with you tonight. So I currently live and work in Custer, South Dakota, which is about 75 miles south of Sturgis, and own and operate a seasonal motel in Custer that's only open for the summer season, which seems a little bit backwards because I don't get to enjoy riding season, which is not ideal for me, but that means that I do have freedom to travel in the off season. So from about October through April, I'm able to go down to warmer climates. I can ride in the Southwest, things like that. So I have spent 20 years in the hotel industry before I bought my place, working for franchised hotels, Holiday Inns, things like that, and finally decided that 365 work calendar wasn't really for me. I wanted to transition to something that gave me a little bit more flexibility. So I currently serve as the national president of Women International Motorcycling Association, the USA division. And I'll get into that a little bit kind of at the end of talking of some of my travels, in case any of you are interested just in knowing what that organization is and how it works. I also am involved with a podcast that's presented by Jim Martin out of Canada. And you may have heard of it. The Adventure Rider Radio podcast is the main podcast that he does. It's a once-a-month podcast where he interviews travelers from all over the world who are either on the road or back from their travels. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it. And I was a fan for years before Jim invited me to be part of the second podcast that he does once a month. It's called the Raw Panel. And I'm a panel member on that once a month discussion. Lots of fun topics that are thrown out there by listeners. crazy scenarios and thoughts on coming back from long distance travel or long-term travel. A lot of it is related really to adventure travel and international travel with motorcycles. So that's a ton of fun. I'm also co-founder with two other women of a company called Rev Sisters, and we launched that in January of 2020, which for event company to be launching just before COVID didn't really pan out so well, but that's okay. We pivoted and we decided to spin that into online motorcycle film festivals instead of doing them in person. So we've been managing those for the last couple of years and having a lot of fun with that. It was really a great opportunity to provide entertainment for people at a time when they needed it during COVID because people were stuck at home. So it actually turned out great. And that's something that we expect to hopefully grow into other events as things open back up and as we kind of explore those opportunities. I was also involved with an organization called Women Writers World Relay, and I'm not sure if any of you have heard of that, but there was a woman in the UK named Haley Bell back in 2018, and she was, I can't even remember which group it was in, but she posted on a women's motorcycle forum. She said, "Hey, I'm at work like all of us, daydreaming about being out riding instead of sitting here at work in the office, ho hum." And it just occurred to me, I have this idea. Do you think it's possible to take a baton and hand it from one woman rider to the next? Do you think there's enough women riders to actually carry it all the way around the world? Well, I had traveled for a couple of years long distance through North and South America, and I thought, oh, it's totally possible. And I'm also very optimistic about things, maybe more so than being a realist sometimes. Um, but anyway, she formed an organization, and 7 of us stepped up to be the administrators of that group. And we started actually carrying the baton in 2019. The baton did make it all the way around the world. We had 3,600 volunteers carry the baton, a total of 63,000 miles through 79 countries. It took a year. And we crossed the finish line in February of 2020, again, just before COVID hit. So we had a lot of really good things going on. We got really lucky with that. Currently, I have 3 bikes in the stable. I have a KLR 650, an XT 225, and an XT 250. They're all dual sports. When I first started riding, I learned on a Kawasaki 250, a little Sherpa, and I loved that bike. It was something I felt really comfortable picking up. If I dropped it, I could take it up, gravel roads, little dirt trails, really enjoyed that bike. And then I moved up to a Sportster. I borrowed a friend's Sportster for about a year, and then rode a Sportster for a couple of years after that. And then I bought a Fat Boy. So I was involved in cruisers. And again, that probably comes from my roots in Sturgis. But eventually I met an international traveler, a guy from the UK who was traveling on a Yamaha Tenere 660. And those at the time were bikes that they didn't sell in North America. Eventually the 700 has come out. So that's kind of our version of that type of bike in North America. But anyway, what I have in the stable right now is all dual sports because I've really found that that's where my love lies. I like to go check out gravel roads and dirt roads and get kind of into the back country and 2 lanes. So that's usually where I spend my time. I've ridden in a variety of countries, I think on 4 continents, 23 countries right now. And my big trip that I took that I talk about quite a bit is that I spent 2 years full-time riding in North, Central, and South America. And that's the trip that I'm going to share a little bit with you about today. I do have a couple of wish list rides that I'd like to do. And these are big ones. I mean, believe me, I'd like to just, go ride in Colorado for a weekend. I'll go anywhere. And I'm very happy going for a ride in the Black Hills where I live. That's really one of my favorite places in the world to ride. So I'm lucky that I live here and that I'm from here. But of course, I'm biased. But here we go. So this is what my trip looked like when I traveled in the Americas. The little blue dot in the middle of the US is where I live. And I took off the red route is heading to the right and to the northeast was how we hit the road. I was traveling with my boyfriend at the time on his Tenere and me on my KLR. We rode up into Canada and rode the Trans-Labrador Highway, which I'll get into in just a second, but it was fairly new at the time. And then we came back down through the United States, kind of zigzagged through so I could pick up a few states that I hadn't been to. I had never been to Alabama, and I thought, well, if I'm taking some time off of work, I'd really like to, go to places I've never been and go explore. And really enjoyed riding in the Appalachian states on our way back south. So then follow the red line down all the way into Mexico, all of the countries in Central America, and then down to South America. Went to the bottom and then had to come back out as far as Buenos Aires to catch a flight for my motorcycle. So I flew my bike back from Buenos Aires to Vancouver, Canada, and then rode home from Vancouver. And so that blue line that you see is the flight path for the bike which kind of ties the whole loop together. So I left home in June of 2013. Originally was going to be gone 6 to 12 months, wound up being gone for 2 years. And that's a whole other story. But this was one of my first glimpses of the Trans-Labrador Highway. Very thick gravel. It was a very remote and rugged road. It had only been opened a couple of years. Some of the sections were new because they used to ferry around it. So we were out in the middle of nowhere. And that was a really unique experience. I'm going to bypass showing photos of the United States because I know a lot of us have seen a lot of that. So we rode through Appalachian on the way back, all the way across the southern US, and then crossed into Mexico. We spent 3 months riding in Mexico, down Baja, through the mainland, Copper Canyon, all the way through to the East Coast, and then made our way down into Belize, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, all of the countries, and just spent 3 months in the smaller countries of Central America, exploring all the little villages, riding a lot of the more famous roads. There's a highway that runs between North and South America, the Pan American Highway. So it runs actually from Alaska all the way to the bottom of Chile. And it's obviously something like 17 or 18,000 miles long. But when you get to the bottom of Panama, there is a gap in the road, and it's about 90 miles long. It's called the Darien Gap, and it was intentionally left out. There's a national park there, in Darien Jungle is in Darien National Park. So there's no trafficking, no roads that go through there. And motorcyclists or overlanders that drive trucks and things have to find a way to ship their vehicles. And we had to find a way to ship motorcycles. So you can either do it by boat or by air. A lot of bikers traveling north or south will fly their bikes just over that gap, usually from Bogota, Colombia to Panama City or vice versa. We were headed south, of course, and we got the opportunity to ship our bikes and travel ourselves on the Stahlrat, which is a sailboat. And there were about 12 bikes that were strapped to the deck of the ship that week that we took our crossing. 18 motorcyclists, some had shipped their bikes on containers. So kind of a unique process, just working our way around that gap in the highway. And this is a picture of us getting ready to load our bikes. That was pretty nerve-wracking. They threw a rope up over the mast of the sailboat and created a boom and actually lifted our bikes one at a time off of the pier and carried them out over the water and onto the deck of the ship. So you can imagine how you're sweating. I mean, this is your mode of transportation as it's flying out over, 70-foot deep water at that point in the bay. But eventually we made our way across just that little corner of the Caribbean and to Colombia and on to the next continent. And our plan originally was to go east and ride into Venezuela, which we did. We went into Venezuela for a couple of weeks. But at the time, our schedule was a little bit delayed. So we were hitting it at poor timing because it was the rainy season. And in Guyana, French Guyana, and Suriname, they aren't equipped with a lot of infrastructure as far as paved roads. And their roads are famous for being very muddy, very deep, and not really passable at sometimes in the rainy season. So we turned back, went west, decided to go back through Colombia and then head south through Ecuador. and make our way through the Andes, which made me happier. It was part of the world I hadn't seen before. Instead of going through the jungle Brazilian side, which I think, I'm sure that was beautiful too. And I hope to someday see some of those parts of those countries. But I was more excited about the mountains. We crossed south of the equator in Ecuador. And this would have been about a year, maybe a year and 2 months into the trip at that point. My goal all along was to reach Ushuaia at the bottom of South America where the boats leave for Antarctica. And I knew obviously that a year into the trip, I still hadn't made it to South America at all, that I was going to need to stay longer. So we kept traveling, really mindful of the seasons. Obviously in the Southern Hemisphere, things are a bit different. We passed through tropical areas, we were in the mountains, and then ever mindful of the reversed seasons that we needed to be aiming for Ushuaia at something like January or February, which is the peak of their summer, so that we could maximize good weather conditions if we could, as we were headed south through Patagonia. Some of my favorite roads were in Peru. This road that I'm showing the last couple of slides, this one is Canyon del Pato. It is a converted railroad line that was used to ship ore out of the mountains from the upper mountains down to the coastal areas. And it's been converted. It's called Canyon del Pato. Peru was a beautiful country, and really every country in Latin America had so much culture and so much community, just really vibrant cities, villages, lots of celebrations and festivals, and not to mention the landscape. The landscapes were incredible. Peru was really rugged, had a lot of desert along the coast and a lot of breathtaking valleys. Not to mention UNESCO World Heritage Sites that we tried to pick up along the way. We did a lot of those and a lot of ruins in Central and South America both. One of my favorite parks or riding areas was in Peru, and it was called Huascarán National Park. And this is just as we're entering Huascarán National Park, riding up into the mountains. And this is a heavily switched back road. This is a dirt road. That was stair-stepping its way up into the mountains. And some of the highest peaks in South America are surrounding this national park. Beautiful riding. Obviously, a lot of changing conditions, and we were out in it. This is a picture of me on one of those stair steps that I just showed. So a different take on that same valley. Tons of stunning landscapes. This is a picture at the top looking back down into the valley. If you look at that little thin white thread down next to the lakes in the valley, that's the road that we first rode in on before climbing the stair steps up to the top. Glaciers surrounding us in every direction. Again, and this was just kind of, it's crazy to say it, but it was just kind of an average day riding in South America. I mean, this was exceptional, but there were so many opportunities for beautiful rides all over the country. Lots of unique wildlife, of course. We saw guanacos. There are ostriches, a South American version of an ostrich. We actually camped here, and there were alpacas and llamas, guanacos all over. And in fact, where we were camped here at this location, wild camping on the grass, I didn't know it at the time, but we were camped in the middle of a bed of tarantulas. So there were tiny little gray, they weren't very big, but gray spiders all over it. I didn't know it. So lots of different wildlife than you expect. And I'm not a fan of spiders, but they actually did not bother me. So I got along okay. This is another valley a little further south in Peru, and just another example of one of those kind of stair-step switchback roads, 29 switchbacks to get either up or down to make crossing of a mountain pass, quite a feat of engineering when you think about it, and then the road disappearing into the valley. So lots of steep valleys, lots of snowfall. Weather conditions can be very unpredictable in this part of the world, but man, the views are worth it. Stunning. We kept making our way south, again, mindful of that timeline and when we needed to target being in Ushuaia before winter would start setting in down there. This is us crossing Lake Titicaca into the country of Bolivia. And in Bolivia, there's one main road that is super popular that we were aiming for, and that was the Death Road. It's famous, and it unfortunately earned its history and earned its name because of it being a narrow road that was famous for landslides. But the road itself has been replaced with a new highway across the valley, so it's actually now a little bit more of a tourist destination. The road is only used one way, so instead of having to accommodate two-way traffic, which is creating a lot of the hazard, now it only is used for one-way traffic, so it's much safer. One of my favorite things about traveling as long as we did and long distance was being able to practice Spanish. And as we crossed the ferry, I was able to have a nice conversation with a family. And it was really the turning point for me where I realized as we were crossing, I'd been talking to this family for 45 minutes in Spanish, completely immersed. And I don't think that I'd realized that my Spanish had gotten that good. And believe me, it wasn't great, but it was enough that I could have a conversation at length and really kind of interact with locals. And that really is one of my favorite parts about long-term and long-distance travel. We stayed in La Paz. This is just a kind of an aerial shot from a tram in the city of La Paz, Bolivia. Camped on the outskirts of town, came into town for money and insurance and some paperwork and just supplies and things. And then went back up to the edge. It's kind of sits down in a little bit of a bowl. We came back up to the edge then and rode out towards the Death Road. And this is the top of the Death Road, the top of the Yungas Valley. You actually descend something like 10,000 feet in the course of 40 miles. So this is at the top where there's snow, and you can see it's fairly barren. But as we progress down through that valley, turn the corners and follow that valley around the next bend, believe it or not, in less than an hour, the landscape looked like this. And we were in the midst of a jungle and vine-covered valley. And this is our two bikes parked on the edge of the Death Road in Bolivia. We headed further south, making our way towards Chile and the northern deserts of Chile. Again, just riding through rural villages. And at that point, we were not following it. In fact, for most of the trip, we did not follow the Pan American Highway. I prefer to go through villages and wasn't afraid of gravel at that point. I had been earlier in the trip, really had some struggles with it, but by this time, it was something that was pretty comfortable and pretty normal. And I realized that those roads, the gravel roads, were the ones that were going to take me back into the places that I really wanted to see and the experiences that I wanted to have. We'd pulled over for a water break in just kind of a crossroads little village. And this woman had her son on her hip and he was crying. And we'd stopped over to have a break or pulled over to have a break. And I usually kept a banana in my tank bag so that I could have just some fuel or food for myself when we stopped. But I waved at the little guy and I pulled the banana out and he stopped crying and he looked like he wanted it. So I thought, oh, I'll see if he does. And she came over and took it and he smiled and he was very happy. So again, just a nice interaction on the side of the road and something that you don't experience in our part of the world. We rode across the Salar de Uyuni and camped for a night on the Salar. It's a 4,500 square mile salt flat, so bigger than the Bonneville salt flats, much bigger. It's incredible. And it's kind of situated on the edge of Bolivia near the the Chileno border. So then we kept making our way south into Chile. And this area was entirely surrounded by newly formed volcanoes. So these mountains don't really have much vegetation on them. And a lot of them had volcanic activity, steam. There's a lot of hot pools, sulfur beds, things like that in this part of the world. You can smell a lot of sulfur in the air. And we rode, again, kind of back roads. Believe it or not, this doesn't look a lot worse than the main highway. The main highway was dirt as well to get from Uyuni into the country of Chile. I struggled with sand. I still struggle with sand. I thought this was kind of a funny shot. It was just a moment where I was just exhausted. And I know a lot of people at home thought we were traveling and having a good time and living a permanent vacation for 2 years, but it was a lot of work. And yeah, just you can, I think everybody can relate, just one of those days. Eventually, we kept making our way south through Chile, which was again one of my favorite countries. Patagonia was amazing. And one of the things that had been on my bucket list was to get to Torres del Paine National Park. And this is one of the roads that we took through Torres del Paine. And we, of course, made it to, as our goal was to get to Tierra del Fuego and to Ushuaia. And I had it in my head that Ushuaia was going to be the finish line, but somewhere around a month before we got there, it occurred to me, oh, wait, it's not like I actually get off my motorcycle in Ushuaia. I'm gonna have to get that bike back home. And it really didn't feel like a finish line to me. It was kind of anticlimactic because I still had arrived 5,000 miles just to get back to the plane to fly my bike back to North America and then ride home from there. But it really was an incredible experience to make it to that part of the world. Some of my other moto adventures, I've ridden to all of the lower 48 states. Hopefully we'll make it up to Alaska. I've been, but not on a motorcycle. So that's kind of a bucket list trip for me as well. I rode a section of the Continental Divide Trail with a couple of girlfriends about 5 years ago. And they did the whole ride from Banff, Canada down to the border near Antelope Wells in New Mexico. But I only had 1 week of vacation from work. So I joined them in Montana, over by Dillon, Montana, and then rode just the tail end of Montana that was left, the sections of Idaho and Wyoming, and then just got in the border of Colorado, and then I had to turn and come back. And it just a fun experience. I really enjoyed that I got to do that with a couple of dear friends and women that I met on the road. I mentioned that Women Riders World Relay, and I carried the baton for a couple of legs of that, which is a great experience down in South America. And then last year, I was able to participate in a women's tour of northern Pakistan, and we went for a couple of weeks, enjoying the riding and mountains there. Excuse me, just a second. I'm gonna take a drink.
Michelle, was that the Chickistan tour, as Liza would call it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, and in fact, she's getting ready to do another one again this year. So it was incredible. And this picture is also from Chickistan, and there were 9 of us that went over. So yeah, and I'm sorry, guys, I haven't been paying attention to the chat, but if you guys have any questions, by all means, pop them out there, and I'd love to answer any questions that you have. So yeah, these are kind of the things that motorcycling means to me. My favorite thing about motorcycling is people, whether I meet them in my own country or anywhere on the road. That's really what I look for. I like to travel back roads. I like to camp, and just really enjoy the landscape and meet the people, which I think is probably common to a lot of people. As Deb pointed out at the beginning, I wanted to mention just briefly this Women's International Motorcycle Association that I am president of. It was formed in 1950 by an American woman, and now there are chapters in nearly 40 countries around the world. It was the first international organization for women. Louise was, I think, kind of a woman who was ahead of her time. I understand she lived in New York, but she used to ride her Indian motorcycle through the forests into Canada and rode what would be more or less enduro races back in the 20s and 30s, which to me is just amazing. I know that the first women to cross the US by motorcycle did so in 1916. So I know there were a lot of motorcyclists, traveling and experiencing the world at that point. But the fact that she was out there doing that and being kind of a visionary and thinking of connecting women riders so that they were able to support each other, I think is such a neat legacy that we've inherited. So I passionate about connecting other women writers from around the world and supporting them, especially because I've had a little bit of experience traveling internationally. And so I like to help other women enjoy that experience too, if they can. And here's my contact information. I'm on Facebook. I do blog. The sturgischick.com site that I have is the blog where I logged my South American travels. And I did ride reports like twice a week. So there's tons of photos and stories. That still lives out there on the web. It's not something I'm really maintaining or posting a lot in anymore, but I'm hopeful that I can catch it up sometime. And then I wrote a couple of books about that experience. The Butterfly Route is my memoir of that 2 years. And then Tips for Traveling Overland in Latin America. That was a book that I wrote, just more or less a booklet if anybody else wanted to take that trip. And that one I send to people for free. So if you guys are ever thinking about a trip like that, by all means, just drop me a line and I'll happily send you a complimentary copy of that Tips for Traveling. Or if you know of someone that is, feel free to share that. And then I'm also working on a book of short stories by women motorcyclists. I've been working on it for about 18 months. And so, I think that means I'm actually not working on it because I'm not making as much progress as I would like. Yeah, that's kind of my part of the moto world. So thanks, folks.
Thank you. It's been fascinating.
Yeah, that was great.
Thank you.
It's really
Enjoyed it.
amazing. Thank you so much. And you know what it's special for me. So I'm born and raised in Germany, so not in America. I'm only 9 years over here, and I joined Deb's group. Actually, this is why the world comes together again. And so what I mentioned when I came to the US, that less women in America riding for themselves, that really surprises me. I was really, like, hello.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So yeah,
It
I love
really
these
is.
stories. I think it needs more from us, outside there.
I agree. I totally agree.
Yes, thank you.
Michelle, all those beautiful scenes and scenery and rough areas. Did you have any trouble with maintenance and getting tires and things like that on the trip?
No, not at all. And in fact, part of that was the idea behind buying a KLR. And really, the KLR had twofold purposes for me. One, I knew people that had been down there. I'd heard horror stories. I'd flown into parts of Mexico, but I'd heard horror stories, and not that they were true, but you hear rumors about getting robbed and you might have to leave your bike. And frankly, I felt like, okay, if I had a BMW or something expensive that I might fight a little harder for, I worried that I would get stuck or get into trouble. And I thought, a KLR, this is so terrible. I mean, no disrespect. I love my KLR, but I could walk away from it and it wouldn't be the end of the world. I'd be okay. But also because it's carbureted, it was pretty simple to work on. And it was a brand of bike that I could readily get parts for. So there were Kawasaki dealerships in most major cities. I remember buying parts in Mexico, in Costa Rica, Colombia, Ecuador. There was a little bit of a challenge buying tires at one point, only because that was right around or right after the time the Dakar had come through. And they had gone through lots of tires on the continent. So there was a little bit of a shortage of my front tire size. But otherwise, no, the bike ran perfectly. It ran really, really well. I had bad fuel at one point that I got at a gas station in an actual gas station in Chile. But otherwise, no problems at all. In fact, I bought gas a lot out of old Coke bottles and barrel drums that they poured through like a filter sock. Never had any problems with any of the roadside fuel. So the bike ran like a charm.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, thank you.
That would be also a question for me because, I had so many people going through Mexico, and I think really South America would be awesome for bikes. And actually, we plan with our group a trip to the Panamericana in Chile, but we will rent some bikes. We will not take our own bikes over there.
Yeah.
So, but this would be a question, you know, especially as a woman, you was not alone. There's also women, they make it alone. So, but how you feel, did you feel insecure when you was going through, or, you know, I would not going prepared as well, because you never know what's happened, right?
Right.
And I think if you think the worst thing, it will happen, the worst thing. So I'm also, you know, like more like, okay, don't think about it. But what is your experience with that? Or was it scary moments where you thought, maybe I don't have any drop of gas, or maybe I will not find a gas station, or, you know, little things like that?
Yeah, you know, there were lots of worries, of course, over the course of 2 years traveling in foreign countries. In all of those countries, of course, you're going to have some worries. I think mine were really related about whether or not there were going to be places to buy fuel, just because I wasn't familiar with that part of the world. The only place that we really, I mean, there were a couple of challenges we'd read online with ride reports about long, what I would call like a gas gap, where a long stretch of road didn't have a lot of fuel stops, so that if you missed one, you really would have a hard time making the next one and possibly run out of fuel. One of those was in Mexico on Baja. Another one was in on Ruta 40 in Argentina. And so we were aware of that. We watched for those. But we really didn't have a lot of trouble with that. The one place that we sort of got stuck, but we wound up being able to buy fuel from somebody locally again out of like a 10-liter can, was on the border between Bolivia and Chile. And we were in a little like a railroad town, a worker town, and there was no gas station. It was listed on the map. I had an app on my phone and it said they had a station, but they didn't. It had closed. So we just asked a local, and people are so resourceful. You'd be amazed what there is for help, for welding equipment, for fuel, for supplies, for skill sets, for food, for water, even in the tiniest villages. People just really band together, and they have more resources than I ever expected.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
As a woman, did you ever feel threatened in any way?
You know, I didn't. And I will say, in fairness, I wasn't traveling alone. I was traveling with my boyfriend. There were a lot of times that we were separated. Like I would walk into villages and go buy groceries for dinner when he was, you know, maybe setting up the tent or doing some maintenance work on the bikes. In fact, I would say I felt safer when I was alone, because I think there's something in particular about the Latin American culture that is very protective of women. I think they have a little bit of chivalry still that exists in that part of the world. And so if I was walking through a village, it's very obvious I'm not from Latin America. To look at me, blonde, taller than most people, really kind of stand out locally. So I drew attention and I was aware of that. But I would have people pull up, either if I was on my motorcycle or walking, and just say, you know, do you need help? Do you know where you're headed? Do you need directions? Do you need a ride? Are you safe? Do you feel safe? I got lots of people just really openly offering support and making sure that I actually felt safer in some ways than I did in even parts of the United States.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They really
That's
made a concerted
fantastic.
effort. Yeah.
So what was your biggest challenge the entire trip?
Well, let's see. I would say the biggest one for me was probably getting over my fear of gravel. And I don't know if any of you have heard my story, but 2 weeks into the trip on that Trans-Labrador Highway, I had a wreck. I was riding in kind of strong crosswind in that deep gravel, and just, you know, being fairly inexperienced riding a lot of gravel, I dropped my bike and I broke my leg. And yeah, and
Uh-oh.
I was in the middle of nowhere. So I got flown out to have surgery to have my leg repaired. And then I was in Canada with a broken leg, waiting to get, you know, make decisions about what I was going to do. Was I going to go home to recuperate? Was I going to recover there? And I decided to stay there. And mentally, I just thought, that's fine. I'll heal. I'll get back on the bike and I'll go ride some more and I'll finish the trip. I can do this. But physically actually getting back on that bike and having then thousands of miles of gravel ahead of me was a much different reality than what I envisioned it was. And so that overcoming that fear of gravel was probably my biggest hurdle for the whole trip.
That sounds like the main road through Carrizo Plains National Monument. It's a gravel kind of thing. And I was down there with some buddies. Oh, on this beast you see behind me. No,
Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know. Where's that at, Scott?
that's in Carrizo Plains. It's kind of north of inland of LA, San Luis Obispo area.
Okay.
They're known for a real super bloom kind of thing if they get enough rain. And you've got to have a road legal vehicle for all the trails there. But it's a pretty cool place to get some of that kind of gravel riding experience and some hills and so on, and feel all cool. And like a Subaru goes by you on the same road. It's like,
That sounds amazing. I'll have to put that on my list.
yeah, it's a neat place. Michelle, were you on Treasure Island with the Wur-Wur?
Yeah, I
Or-
was.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I met you there with Liza.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm sorry. Yeah. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you.
What a
Nice
small
surprise.
world.
Yeah, it is.
I looked you up on Facebook. We've got a half a dozen mutual friends, and I've got to ask about one. How do you know Mark Ordway?
Mark Ordway. Well, through motorcycles. I don't know him personally. I don't know that I've met him.
I've worked with him for many years. He's down in he's from
Arizona?
Michigan originally, but he's down in Arizona. Yeah,
Yeah, I thought he was in
he's
Arizona.
a great guy.
I
So,
might have
yeah,
met him at an event called the Overland Expo.
could be. Yeah. Okay.
So I think that I maybe met him once there, but I haven't been to that for like 5 years. I went from 2012 through 2013, and then a couple years when I got back from South America. So yeah, small world.
One more, Allison Ha.
I know her because she was a speaker through a women's motorcycle conference. Isn't she?
I went to Mexico with her on a I mission
Oh, okay. Wow.
No
years ago,
way.
8 or 10 years ago. So
How that's funny. She's a friend of mine. She lives up. She's actually up more towards like north central Texas now, and now she comes and she speaks. She spoke here, and we've had her at a lot of the women's conferences more
Yeah.
recently, and she is a doll. She's super cool, and you can ask her all sorts of crazy questions. You can. It's great.
well, you can reach out to her. She's got a little bit of a Rotary connection, Deb.
I did not know that. Oh my God, she never told me. How
And then one of your other friends was one of our founding members. She's no longer with us, but no longer in Rotary. Let me restate that. But Sarah Schilke,
Oh, sure.
yeah,
Yeah,
talk
fantastic.
about dedicated motorcycle rider.
Yeah, for
Another,
sure.
another riding question for you, Michelle.
Yeah.
Were you a lot more fit after completing this ride or these various rides?
Yes, and it's so funny that you say that because I submitted an excerpt from my book for a newsletter that's coming out for the Women's International Motorcycle Association, the international newsletter, and the chapter that I picked. Part of that chapter actually said that, and I went back to reread it, and I was talking about the changes in my body, just having been on the road for 2 years, how literally my shoulders were broader, and like it's little things like I could see more
Yeah.
veining in my hands.
Mhm.
Yes, my neck, and
Yes.
just everything about me was different, and from skin tone and muscular. I mean, it was, yeah. And now I've gotten fat and comfortable at home in the States. So
Me too.
Would you do something like that
Oh,
again?
yeah, in a
Would-
heartbeat.
You would?
Absolutely,
what-
I would.
Committing to something like that and doing it the way you did it, what kind of money do you end up spending on that time?
Yeah. So when I first came home in 2015, I started giving presentations at Horizons Unlimited events. I don't know if you've heard of those or if you've been to any of those. And I shared a spreadsheet at the end of the slide presentation, and just you guys can ask me anything. And if you think of a question later, you're welcome to email me. So I wound up spending $32,000 for 2 years full time. And that included flights, insurance, meals, lodging. We spent about a third of the time camping. Some of it wild camping, sometimes in campgrounds, sometimes hotels, hostels. And that included, I flew out to the Galapagos to see the Galapagos when I was in Ecuador. And I went out to Easter Island when I was in Chile. So there were some perks, and those trips themselves based out of the US would have been a few $1,000s each. And they were much more affordable. I think those things also just kind of put the trip that much more into the stratosphere of, trip of a lifetime.
I spend more than that in 6 months. So, this is going to be my excuse to my wife of why I can do this.
Right. There you go.
We can go.
It's cheaper to be on the road. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Did you stop and work anywhere along the way, Michelle?
I didn't work for money. I did a little bit of volunteer work in Mexico and again in Guatemala. I spent 2 weeks in Guatemala near Panajachel, working for an organization called Mayan Families for a week, building a social media presence. It was through an organization called Do Good As You Go. Both of those opportunities. The one in Mexico was a week of volunteering at a children's or girls' orphanage, and then the other one was with Mayan Families.
Tell us
Oh.
about your Colorado property.
Oh, South Dakota. Yeah. But hang on, I forgot there was one thing I did. There is a thing that I worked through called Help Exchange in South America. And so I did work for board, not for any cash. And that was working on a coffee plantation in Colombia for a week. So yeah. My place in South Dakota, thanks for asking, is a little 16-unit motel. It's a vintage property called the Chalet Motel. It's in Custer. And yeah, it's open 6 months a year. It was built in 1937, which means it is a full-time and a half job, just trying to keep it afloat, keep it standing. But it's a lot of fun.
I had my bike in Custer many years ago. That would be fun.
Oh yeah, neat.
I'm hoping to go up and visit Michelle this summer. That's been on the table now for a bit, going up there, I believe in August.
I hope so. Yeah.
I'm hoping.
August.
I'm supposed to ride on Chicks on 66 as well. And it's like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do all this. I would
Oh
love
my
it.
gosh.
Awesome.
That sounds amazing.
Count me in, because then the convention is over. We have the Rotary International Convention comes up, and by the way, since yesterday, I know it will be happen. So the International Convention in Houston will be happen this year, and so maybe the reservation numbers will going up, but now we know we will see that all. So you are our guests in Houston. So Deb and my guest. So, and it will be the first convention with a lot of motorcycles, I hope, so that's what we're planning. But this
Fantastic.
it's over at the 8th of June. So then we can maybe make a trip in the August, Deb, to go up to Michelle, right? But did you
Fantastic.
figure out how many miles we need to go, Deb?
I keep muting and unmuting myself. I have been looking at it, and actually what I was thinking about doing was actually trailering up, because I know I want to get up there. I want to ride. I do not want to come out of Texas in August. So
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
have a plan.
Yes. So how many miles? Did you check it out?
Oh God, no, I gotta look. It's been
Okay, I can do it
everything's
right
a
now.
whirlwind. But actually, I'm gonna ask Michelle a question, because this is one that I was like, I wonder what she would say. So if you could ride with anybody, who would you want to go out and ride with?
Me.
I don't know. I guess, gosh, that's a great question. This is probably going to sound kind of strange. I'm not super aggressive. In fact, I'm very, very slow. I'm not competitive with riding. I stop and take lots of photos. I actually would love to go for a ride with Ted Simon, which is kind of scary because he's 90 and I can't believe he's still riding. So I'd probably want to steer very clear of him, but I think that'd be pretty legendary. That'd be hard to beat.
That's an interesting answer. That is a really interesting answer. Yeah, because every so often I think to myself, well, if I had a chance, who would I really want to get out on the road with? And there are different people at different times be like,
Yeah.
oh wow, that would be really cool. Just to have that experience and
Mhm.
see, we always talk about where we want to go. And
Yeah.
I've been on calls with Michelle and we start digging in and we come up with like all sorts of places. It's like, wow, I never even thought about riding there. Like Mongolia.
Yeah.
I mean, wow, what a cool trip that could be. And just, I can imagine the photos would be, absolutely amazing. But all of a sudden I went, well, who would I want to go on a trip with? Who would of all the things I could do, who would I actually want to get out and about with? And it is kind of a think kind of moment.
Yeah. That's
Yep.
going to leave the wheels turning for a while for me.
Deb, there's I have a guy out of Ohio that runs trips to Mongolia,
Oh, wow.
and I've been planning to ride with him. He's gone through some health issues. Of course, the pandemic screwed up, but he's back in again. So next year or two, that's going to happen.
Oh, wow. How very cool.
Yeah, so you might get a chance.
Oh, well, there you go. Now it'd be interesting. So many places there, even here in the US, there's so many places to go and experience. And my own personal mantra has become I'm kind of over waiting on other people to do things. So that's the mentality I've adopted. And it's just funny, even in my very close personal group of riders, I'm just like, okay, this is what I'm going to go do. And whoever wants to go with me, great. And if you can't or you don't want to, that's okay too. So
So
interesting.
I checked it out, by the way, to Custer. It will, from my point out, and I'm south from Deb, so it's 1,343 miles.
Okay. Yeah.
It's an overnighter.
It's
19,
it's an
19 hours, it tells me, 19 hours and 43 minutes. So
It's more than an iron butt. So yeah.
You mentioned this boyfriend. Is he still hanging around or have you outpaced him?
I,
noisy.
I don't think it's an outpacing thing. No, we're not together anymore. We split up a few years ago. He lives in Arizona. Yeah. So we went our separate ways. We found that we traveled really, really well together, but actually settling down and living real life together probably wasn't for us.
Michelle, there is a great organized ride in Egypt called the Cross Egypt Challenge.
Ooh,
It's held in October. You can Google it.
I will.
You can rent either a scooter, which is what I did, or a motorcycle, and I think the motorcycle was like 1,000 cc's. The price includes lodging, meals, some extras includes some day trips, like you go down to Luxor and you get to see the Valley of the Kings, the Valley of the Queens, the temples. You can
Wow.
go on a hot air balloon ride. You can go on a Nile River ride. It's a great experience, and I recommend the scooter.
Okay. That sounds
It's good.
amazing.
We had somebody from Egypt, actually, he offered us the ride, and so John was joining, and yeah.
That is so cool. Thank you, John. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah,
This year they're going into the Sinai Peninsula.
Wow.
Oh, hey, John, pull up that map. You had that map up behind you earlier. He's got a map of this October's trip, and it was pretty cool.
Mhm.
Or even if you want to just share it outright.
Oh, yeah.
There
Now
you go.
that's the proposed route. The routes can change any day because of security concerns.
Okay. And how
And
long
then
time-wise?
I think the ride itself was like 9 days, but I was gone a little over 2 weeks. I spent a couple of days in Cairo before and after. The trip actually starts out of Alexandria.
Okay.
You are accompanied by police the entire way on the ride. They had an assigned security officer to the group. It's actually organized by Rotarians, but it's not a Rotary function.
Okay.
They have their own gas tanker. You wind up eating out in the middle of nowhere. They set up these tents. This year we had packaged food. Usually when there's no COVID, they cook lunch.
Wow, what an experience.
You see, so you are always welcome to join our club.
Well, thank you. I might
Welcome.
just do that, and I wish I had spare time, but yeah, I think that's something that I'd be really interested in doing. So
Oh, just so I say this out loud, we've got Vicki Gray coming to speak. We
yay,
lined up some interesting writers, so I'll make sure that I share those events into WEMA as well, because
please do.
Getting Vicki to speak is like a major deal, and so I can't wait for that one.
It is, and I want to hear more about that. She's really inspiring. So
Yes.
motoress.
Mhm.
Well,
Yes, very
Michelle,
true,
I
Steph.
just want to tell you,
thank you so
thank you
much.
very much for this evening. I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation, and I really loved riding with you as you went on this experience.
Thank you so much. That's so kind of you. And I'm so grateful to each of you for taking the time tonight. It's been a lot of fun meeting you, and hopefully see you out on the road sometime in real life.
Or in the meeting, so you can always join us as a guest. You're welcome to do that.
Even better. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
So
Thank you.
we want to end the meeting as well. And who wanted to lead us in the 4-way test? Scott, maybe?
Maybe she says. Yeah, okay. For Rotary 4-way test, number 1, is it the truth?
Truth.
2, is it fair to all?
Yeah,
To all concerned.
3, will it
Will
build
build the
goodwill?
goodwill and better
Better
friendships.
friendships? 4, will it be beneficial?
Beneficial to all
Beneficial to all
concerned.
concerned.
5.
5.
Is it fun?
6 will be legal.
Thank you guys for the good meeting, and have a good night. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle. Great
Michelle.
program. Good.
Kim, Melanie, hope to see
Thank
you
you.
guys again. Bye-bye.
Bye.